Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalrin, and today we'll be taking a look at Assassination Rogue for PvP in Battle for Azeroth. This guide is being made before the PvP season begins, before the raid season begins, so I'm hoping that a lot of this information will be pretty future-proof. But let's talk a bit about Assassination and what you should be looking for when it comes to stats, talents, and general rotation, as well as some of the macros that might help you in player versus player situations. Assassination, like all the other rogue specs, is actually pretty solid. I feel like all three specs of rogue are very close to one another and are pretty equal, at least in the front of PvP. So let's take a look at the Assassination Rogue in this video. Now usually I like to start my videos by talking about talents first, but here we'll actually talk about stats and how should you gear your character for Assassination. The best thing about Assass is all four of the secondary stats like crit, haste, mastery, and versatility. All of them are viable and all of them increase your damage or help you with resources regardless. It is probably the first case that I've seen a spec that has a viable stats no matter what. Like, there's actually no bad stat compared to Outlaw, where mastery is your literally worst stat and it basically rewards almost zero damage increase. Let's talk about what the stats do. Crit allows you, well, more crit chances, but also gives your mutilates, if they crit, or Phantom Knives, a chance if they crit, combo points. So extra combo point generation, making your resource management a lot easier for Assassination. Haste gives you more auto attack speed, so more stabs with your weapon. A good portion of your damage is auto attacks, but also more poison applications. On top of it, also a little bit more energy regen, but it also gives you more ticks from your dots. So for example, let's say you put a dot on the enemy and it's a 16-second long dot. Having higher haste means more ticks during those 16 seconds. With the way that Assassination is designed, the more bleed ticks you have on a poison target, the more energy you get back. So this is pretty great for resource management and damage as well. Mastery is flat damage increase, but it's a flat damage increase as a Battle for Azeroth for bleeds and poisons, so damage over time going to be increased by mastery, but also the bursty poison abilities are going to be increased by mastery. Overall, a great change for Battle for Azeroth, so stacking mastery is also a good idea just for flat damage. Versatility is also good because it covers aspects of mastery like the auto attacks and your mutilate damage, but also increases the healing that you do with Crimson Vial by a little bit and decreases the damage taken. This one is actually not a terrible stat at all to have on the side. A lot of the stats for Assassination, at least for PvP, are going to be very close. In PvE, however, you will going to want to look for haste, crit, mastery, and versatility. Sometimes, depending on how your character sims, some of these stats might get ahead of each other, but at least for PvE set of the game, you're trying to get as much energy, as many resources as possible, so you can get more Envenoms. In PvP, however, you can go for more mastery versatility for beefier Envenoms for that one-shot setup in PvP. So it's a little bit different. But when it comes to getting gear, as long as you're focusing on as much agility from your pieces of gear, you should be good as a SAS. And it's a great spec for somebody who's an Outlaw main or a Subtlety main in order to have Assassination as a playable spec on the side. Some of the different traits you should probably pick up and look out for as Assassination Rogue. One that you basically have to have on at least one piece of your gear: Shrouded Suffocation. Garrote cast from stealth generates 2 additional common points and deals extra damage. This trait, however, does not stack. I feel like Blizzard needs to add, and somebody from my stream actually told me, I wish they added a tooltip that says if a certain trait stacks, or if a certain part of the trait stacks. Shrouded Suffocation does not stack in common point generation or in damage, so you should pick up at least one of those on your pieces of gear. For my rogue, I even have a downgraded piece of gear from 325, where everything else is 340, because this trait is just so damn strong, and being able to put this on multiple targets or even on one target gives you a lot more common points in the opener, a lot more value damage, and with the build that we'll be running, it'll be very, very potent and powerful. Some of the other traits you should look for Assassination, a lot of them are middle ground traits that are probably going to be the best for you, like Resonance Fury. It just adds a little extra bleed, and then of course we have another one over here, it's called Tidal Surge. Again, a little bit extra frost damage. A lot of the middle ground traits are actually viable, so if you're not quite sure exactly what kind of trait you should go for, or if you're not sure if you can apply your current trait, like for example in this headpiece I have Shrouded Suffocation, but already have that in my chest piece, then I feel like the best one's probably going to be Tidal Surge for the most amount of damage increase. But I will have a link down in the description below for you guys on all the traits that are good right now for PvE for Assassination, so you can take a look and compare and contrast them. But one of the traits I will say for sure that I was really hoping to play around with, and as I get more Azeroth gear that I'm just going to keep for Assassination spec, I want to see if I can stack Twist the Knife like I used to do in the beta. This one stacks, but only to a certain extent. As far as I remember, this one stacks on damage, for sure, but the extra duration for Envenom, I believe that effect does not stack at all. It'd be great if Blizzard were a little bit more transparent with some of these effects, but unless we get like a bunch of different pieces of gear, which I haven't been lucky this week, I can't really go test stuff like this. But back in the beta, Twist the Knife would increase the damage of Envenom. Envenom dealing extra damage per combo point, and if you can get 2 stacks of that, so that's a double effect for a beefy Envenom. Alright, now let's talk a little bit about some of the talents for Assassination and what you can run. In a level 15 row, honestly, all these traits are pretty good. Every single one of these talents does have a damage increase. I feel like Master Poisoner is the easiest one out of all of them. You kind of set it and forget it, and it does a lot of things for you for PvP. Elaborate Planning is great if you can maintain it and keep it up, which is not that difficult, but if you're somebody who's not used to maintaining a buff that falls off every 4 seconds, or not used to combining abilities during Elaborate Planning, then this one might be more damage increase, but sometimes too tedious to manage. Blindside is a great alternative to Mutilate, and does really mix up your rotation between having to mutilate, and mutilate some more. It exploits the vulnerability of enemies at 30% health, so you can just start spamming Blindside to stab them to death, and Mutilate has a 25% chance per use to cause Blindside to be free and usable on any target regardless of their health. It only rewards 1 common point, but still very powerful execute like finisher. You can play with either one of these, but if you're going to be doing PvP, I feel like Master Poisoner is the easiest one with the most amount of damage for like the effect of it. At level 30, you will want to go with Subterfuge. There is some playability with Master Assassin for a big burst build, and I would have no problem running something like that in maybe Battlegrounds, but Subterfuge ends up being the best. Subterfuge is great for Assassination because it allows us 3 seconds of stealth abilities in the opener, allowing us to set up a Garrote, get a cheap shot set up, so we can generate the common points and get a Rupture in there. Plus, it makes Garrote deal extra damage. With the trait that we have in our chest piece for Shrouded Suffocation, we actually are increasing the damage of our Garrote even more, and if we are able to spread it on multiple targets, this is actually going to be a lot of dot damage that Assassination could have in the opener, which is very fun to play with. At level 45, it's going to be a question between Vigor and Mark for Death. Because of Assassination and how we're set up at the early end of the game, we don't really have enough haste and crit on its own unless you really specify those stats, and then you're kind of losing out on damage. So where you're going trying to balance out most of your secondary stats, you're probably not going to have the best energy regen. This is why Vigor ends up being a good alternative, so you will be able to get a bit more energy regen, you'll be able to get more energy in the opener, so you're able to get a smooth opener on the target. But Mark for Death also has a playability. With it being now a 30-second cooldown, you can Mark for Death Kidney a target, you can Mark for Death Envenom a target during burst. It gives you a lot of aspects to damage and I guess the flexibility of the spec. So in this row, decide which one works for you, but I kind of like Mark for Death if I'm going for like a bursty build with Master Assassin, so I can get that Mark for Death Envenom, since Envenom is now really bursty in this game. But Vigor ends up being better maybe for a long-term fight. So this one is really preferential. At level 60, we got a couple options. Cheat Death is a good one in arenas where you're going to be one-shot. Leech Poison has some playability now because of the way that rogues are healing. With how much damage Assassin can put up, you can actually have a decent sustain with Leech. Also, Leech will increase the healing you get from Crimson Vial by a little bit because of the Leech effect with your poisons. Works really well with Master Poisoner because it'll make that Leech instead of 10%, 12%, which is a slight increase, and can be viable. But Elusiveness can also be viable in some PvP situations. I've actually been using Elusiveness a hell of a lot more on my rogue, and being able to pre-feign certain abilities like a big Chaos Bolt or a big Obliterate coming at you is a good idea with rogue. But because of Feign 15-second cooldown, a lot of people don't really look at Elusiveness nearly as much. I feel like with you being able to go hyper-offensive with Assassination and output far more damage to be able to self-heal yourself or having Cheat Death might be more value for you guys. At level 75, this one is kind of your choice, but I do want to give you guys consideration. I feel like Prayer in the Week is great if you're going for a bursty setup, and great in arenas where you play maybe with a mage. Iron Wire is amazing. Increase the duration of your Garrote silence by 3 seconds. A 6-second silence in the opener would be insane. Or a vanish Garrote the whole enemy team to make sure that they cannot heal. Also, enemy silence by Garrote deal 15% reduced damage for 8 seconds. So you can use it on classes like Warriors, because Warriors technically can be silenced, and Warriors will deal 15% less damage, basically making you cuck their opener. So it's very interesting how you can use it, how you can kind of use this to counter enemies' damage, and they can't really do anything about it. Internal bleeding is a decent one if you're going to go for kidney shots and you want to go for spread damage. This one became a lot less viable because internal bleeding no longer works for your energy regen. Hell, the only bleeds that work with your energy regen are now Rupture and Garrote, so internal bleeding is still good for damage, but it was really good back in Legion because of the extra energy that you got out of it. So this one was really your option, but I really want to stick with either Iron Wire or Prayer in the Weak. At level 90, we have some options. Venom Rush is generally not a talent a lot of people play. I feel like maybe in certain arena situations, if you're just going for like maybe multi-spread dot damage and you're just trying to, I guess, get a little bit extra energy out of your playstyle and more comp point generation to spread dots faster, Venom Rush might be okay. Toxic Blade offers you a little bit extra damage and works well with Master Poisoner for, again, even more damage that stacks together for a bursty playstyle, fairly low cooldown, fairly low on energy, and generates a comp point. Exsanguinate is another one that has a longer cooldown than Toxic Blade, but the damage of this one is actually pretty cool. Also has a 25 energy cost instead of a 20 energy cost, but the damage of your bleeds, since your bleeds are so strong right now on Battle for Azeroth, especially with Subterfuge and your trade that you're running for Garrote, this can actually be very powerful together. And if you're going for a big burst where you're trying to one-shot somebody, Exsanguinate is actually very viable. It's just, the issue with this I can see is it's a fairly long cooldown and costs a bit more energy. It will grant you back energy though, so I guess that's a trade-off. I feel like a lot of people stick with Toxic Blade because it's the easier option. Either way, both of them deal good damage. It's just one is the easier version, the other is not nearly as easy. So it's really up to you, but feel free to play around with these two. Because we're running Master Poisoner, I feel confident running Toxic Blade. But if I were running Blindside or even Elaborate Planning, I'd have no problem swapping to Exsanguinate. At level 100, this one is really not that much of an option. I think it's going to end up being Poison Bomb no matter what you do. If you're running Master Poisoner and you have Toxic Blade, it's definitely a good thing to grab Poison Bomb. But out of all these are all AoE. You don't really want to, I mean, unless you go into a battleground and you want to spread damage on everybody. In arena situations, as Assassination, you don't really want to AoE and hit someone who is polymorphed by a mage, or get someone out of a fear when you're running with a Warlock. You kind of want to simulate your damage into one target and really just siphon in and while training that one singular target by helping out with CC and throwing out a blind here and there. So Poison Bomb ends up being the best for pure single target. Hidden Blades is okay if you're going for like some crazy one-shot burst, maybe with Night Stalker, that has some potential, but most of these are very PvE oriented. Although I could see somebody running around with Crimson Tempest in a battleground just putting insane pressure on the whole enemy team, but Poison Bomb ends up being the safer choice in most PvP situations. Now for the PvP talents, we got Gladiator's Medallion, which is probably the best choice unless you are an orc or a human, where you can actually play around with maybe Relentless or something along those lines. After that, I like to go with Deadly Brew. Now, I feel like Assassination, most of your damage comes from is Deadly Poison, and Wound Poison still is a decent poison. I just prefer the damage potential of Deadly. So I feel like it's a lot better to just go for Deadly Brew. Deadly Poison applies a minor wound poison to the target for 8 seconds, reducing healing by 18%. So it's not quite that 30% wound poison effect. Actually, with Master Poisoner, it's 30%, isn't it? So that's actually a pretty big healing reduction when it comes to wound poison. Now, the healing reduction for wound poison, especially with Master Poisoner, is actually pretty big. It is 30%. So technically, it's a lot bigger than like 25% or by a little bit. This will definitely put a lot more pressure on the healers, but dispelling poisons is something that is in the game. And a lot of classes like Druids and Paladins can still dispel poisons fairly easily. Even some other classes that are hybrid classes can dispel poisons. So this one is really an interesting option. I do prefer to go with Deadly Brew so I can get more deadly poison damage. And even though it's a reduced version of a wound poison, only 18% with Master Poison of course applied, I still would rather go with minor wound poison but deal a little bit extra deadly poison damage so I can put out even more pressure, not just from healing reduction but also from my own damage. In the second row, there's a couple different options. Mind Numbing Poison is actually not that bad against caster classes. Being able to spread out even more pressure while Deadly Brew is running and more damage on enemies is also good. Creeping Venom is also a viable option. System Shock can be great for burst. You also have maneuverability if you need mobility. Smoke Bomb is insanely impressive. Cooldown as well. And Shift can be used to slow some targets down. Those are some of the better options. There are stuff like Neurotoxin. This wasn't really getting that much played back in Legion. Honor Among Thieves can have some viability as well. Death from Buff can be pretty decent when it comes to you having not as much mobility. Actually, this one is very decent because you only have one shadow step, while other specs like Subtlety has 2 shadow steps and Outlaw has grapple and hook. So death from above for assassination is actually not a bad option. The last row, if you're playing for PvP in Battlegrounds, flying daggers is a must, I feel like. If you ever get in a team fight, being able to phantomize everybody to spread even more pressure is insanely strong. But you're more than welcome to go with some of the other choices in this row as well. There are a couple different openers that you have with Assassination. The first one is going to be your average opener on a character that is not a healer, so most of the other melee. There are a couple different options of how you want to run. You can either open up with a garrote or a cheap shot. If you're able to take an enemy that's unsuspecting with a garrote, and if you're able to cheap shot him right afterwards, then you're able to maximize the duration of your stun. But if you're going up against somebody who is very much expecting rogue damage to come out any moment, and let's say you're trying not to get stunned by a warrior who's looking for a rogue on a garrote, I feel like it's best to open with a cheap shot at the beginning, and then get your garrote, get your rupture up there, and start building comp points with mutilate. When you're opening up against healers, you can go a little bit differently. Since you're going with a garrote in the opener, if it's a healer like, not a druid or not a monk, usually they can't really stun you while silenced. So you're able to get a garrote into a rupture. I do like to follow that silence into a cheap shot right afterwards to really lock the enemy down, and then to start building comp points for maybe a mutilate or maybe even a kidney shot to follow up to continue my CC chain. But you're able to kind of cheese a little bit of the damage that you are usually putting out as a sass. Hell, if you're lucky, you can actually go with a garrote, rupture, mutilate into a full kidney in order to get the most value out of your CC, especially if you're running with Iron Wire, but it all depends on the luck of RNG for your crits. Vendetta is a cooldown that can be used at any moment. It is going to be the cooldown that you'll be using on most people in order to dish out the most amount of damage. Vendetta, 2-minute cooldown, it will generate 60 energy over 3 seconds. This means that in PvP, it's fine for you to get an opener and set up your bleeds and kind of use this ability at low energy. But you can also use this in the opener as well. You would just put Vendetta on the enemy ahead of time and get your opener going, trying to maximize as much burst as you can, throwing every single ability you can into your setup. Some of the different macros that I like to run for all 3 specs of my rogue, like the sap macro, which lets me look for any enemies nearby like rogues and other stealthies and try to see if I can sap them in an arena. Of course, there's also a focus blind. I usually like to have a focus target on an enemy that I'm gonna crowd control. Focus blind lets me kind of target the second target that I have and throw a blind in the direction without having to fumble with my keys. I also have a stealth macro with a stop attack. This one I just use in order to get out of combat a lot more often, because sometimes when you're auto attacking an enemy and you're just, trying to get into stealth, sometimes you have to hit escape in order to use a stop attack in your character. And when your character stops to attack, it's a lot easier for them to get out of combat. When you're playing Assassination and you're doing some arenas, it's a good idea to make a couple different macros for your Shadow Step, because you can Shadow Step Kick and even Shadow Step Kidney to swap onto enemies. Make a tooltip for a focus target, so what this will do is when you press it and spam the macro until it finishes, you Shadow Step and Kidney the enemy, or you can Shadow Step Kick. Make it 2 versions of those and keep binding that for PvP is a good idea. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and hopefully this video gave you guys a few different ideas of how you can play Assassination for player versus player combat in Battle for Azeroth. Let me know you guys' thoughts in the comments. Are you playing Assassination, and which spec are you enjoying the most for PvP? I'll be doing a Subtlety PvP guide very soon as I get more time into the spec. But I still hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and join us on Discord in the link below. Thank you guys. I'll see all of you in another video.